and welcome to our webinar today on physiologically-based PK for pregnant women and children. My name is Mark Lovern, and I am your host today. I will be facilitating the discussion and introducing our celebrity panel, which consists of luminaries in this field. And part of the introduction to sort of help us get to know our panel members a little better, I'm going to ask a question about what is their favorite thing to do or indulgence when they're not doing world-class science. And since I'm the host, I'll go first on that and say that one of my great pleasures is cooking and entertaining. I love to make a good meal and share it with family. And my first panel member today is Karen Rowland-Yout. Karen has over 20 years of applying PBPK modeling to drug development, and currently she is our Senior VP of Client and Regulatory Strategy at Certara. Before this, she was head of PBPK consultancy at Certara, and that involved putting a framework in place for developing PBPK models used for both internal decision-making and regulatory submission in industry. Karen has published over 80 peer-reviewed journals on drug-drug interaction and dosing in special populations. Prior to joining SimSip in 2002, Karen was a lecturer in clinical pharmacology and therapeutics at the University of Sheffield. She serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Pharmacometrics and Systems Pharmacology. She's the vice chair of the Scientific Programming Committee at ACPT, as well as the chair of the Quantitative Pharmacology Network. Karen, thank you for joining us today and welcome. Would you be so kind as to share with us what one of your indulgences are when you're not in your non-professional life, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe I'm actually going to admit to this live, but my indulgence, and I'm going to be a bit more specific than you, is steak, pie, and chips, and sticky toffee pudding and custard. But I have to confess that I will only eat that after I've had a long hike in winter, and all I think about on the way back to the pub is exactly what I'm going to eat, and that meal that I mentioned.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Our next panel member is Ping Zhao. Ping is a senior program officer at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He had obtained his Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from Beijing Medical University in China. He has a PhD in pharmaceutics from the University of Washington in Seattle. He has over 80 peer-reviewed publications. He was at the FDA for 9 years, starting in 2008, where he led the agency's first PBPK reviewing team, and at that time reviewed over more than 200 PBPK submissions. He has been at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation since 2017, where he is a senior program officer of quantitative sciences. He oversees the investments that apply quantitative pharmacology models to support research and development programs addressing health concerns, especially in women and young children. In addition, he's the associate editor of the Journal of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, the Pharmacometrics and Systems Pharmacology. Ping, thank you for joining. Welcome. And would you share with us your favorite indulgence?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for the nice introduction, and glad to be here. This is probably the personal time, but I want to give a sort of a disclaimer that the views expressed in this webinar will be personal. I like what you introduced, Mark. Cooking is definitely something that I'm in favor of. I think the indulgence changes over time. The pandemic gives me the opportunity to actually cook with my daughter and watch the Great British Baking Show actually together with her.
That's also an indulgence of mine. I love the Great British Baking Show, by the way.
Wonderful, yeah.
And what's your favorite thing to cook with your daughter, if I may ask?
Oh, it changes. Sometimes we just try to replicate what the finalists do from the show. Other times it's just Chinese food.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Ping. Our next panel member is Saskia de Wilt, who is a professor of clinical pharmacology at but I'm going to try and say this right, Radboud University in the Netherlands. She is the author of over 190 peer-reviewed publications. Her research aims to individualize drug therapy in children and pregnant women. She serves in leadership positions for both PedMed.nl and Connect4Children.org, which are nonprofit organizations seeking to improve pediatric medical care. She is also the director of the Dutch and International Pediatric Formulary Consortium. Welcome, Saskia, and thank you again for participating. Can you share with us what one of your favorite indulgences is?
Oh, well, my favorite indulgence is before the food, is to really sleep in on the weekends, then read at least one newspaper, and then just before lunch, cycle to this village with my husband to get lunch, and then food for dinner, which I don't cook, but he cooks. And that's my other indulgence, coming home after work when dinner is ready, and he always cooks really nice. So I think that's it. But the sleeping in part is my indulgence that a lot of people don't see me doing.
Well, let's hope they're not watching you do that. That would be creepy, right?
No, but I don't think I would do it.
Fair enough.
That would be really creepy.
Yeah, exactly. So our final panelist for today is Sue Cole. Sue is a clinical pharmacology assessor at the MHRA, which is the UK Health Authority. She joined the MHRA in 2012 and currently leads the clinical pharmacology team in the Innovative Medicines Group. Prior to joining the MHRA, she worked for 26 years at Pfizer in the UK in the field of drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics. She has been a contributing member to EMA working groups on pharmacokinetics, modeling and simulation, and scientific advice. And she contributed to the guidance on reporting of PBPK modeling and simulation. She is currently the lead investigator at the MHRA on a project with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, evaluating physiologically-based pharmacokinetic modeling and simulation to inform drug dosing in pregnant women. Welcome, Susan. Thank you for joining us today. What is your indulgence?
Thank you, Mark. Unlike Karen, I was going to focus more on the healthy side and say my indulgence is actually walking on the beach. So I'm very lucky in that I live in just over 10 minutes. I can be on the beach. So walking. So it's walking on the beach. But then I will admit that afterwards, I'm quite happy to indulge in chocolate afterwards because I feel that I've earned that. But I would never resort and go as far as jogging or anything like that. So, yes, that's mine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. So I'd like to start the discussion off with Saskia. Saskia, you've been on the front lines of pediatric medicine throughout most of your career. Could you please share with us what drew you to this specialty and what are some of the challenges you have faced when seeking to treat your patients?
Oh, well, that's a nice question. So when I was in medical school, I got the opportunity to do a short elective in Hungary for a few weeks. And I was really interested in pulmonology. But at the time, there was not an elective in adult pulmonology, but only in pediatric pulmonology. So I said, okay, well, that's lungs as well. So let's go there. And I ended up in the Budapest Children's Hospital, not realizing that people would not speak English and only very few people would speak German, which I could kind of semi-master. But the fun part was that although I could not understand the adults, I could understand the kids because non-verbally I could communicate with them. And that was a revelation to me. And I thought, this is really cool. And I think I really like kids as patients, together with all the pathophysiology that I really like. And that really changed, my career perspective. And that's the moment I decided to become a pediatrician. At the time, I wasn't really thinking about drugs or medicines in kids, but just trying to find out what they were having, so the pathophysiology part of it. But during my PhD, I got really into touch with pharmacology, and I chose the subject because it was about drug development and how the liver was involved. So I thought the liver is also, it's an organ and it's physiology, so let's go there. But it was how drugs deal with the liver. And that really inspired me to continue on studying drugs in kids. And well, almost every day when I'm in the unit, I'm in the intensive care, there's questions with drugs, how to dose kids who are obese, how to dose kids who are really ill, or where the kidney doesn't function, or how to dose a new drug that we want to give and we have no idea about. So yeah, I think that drives me all along.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Karen and Ping, Saskia has given us a great perspective on challenges facing pediatricians in Western Europe. However, the two of you have extensive experience in global health. What is the situation in the developing world in trying to treat pediatric patients and pregnant women?
Karen, you want to go ahead first?
Well, yes, I think I'll give my personal perspective, really. I mean, I grew up in West Africa and Central Africa, and I think moved countries every year while I was growing up until the age of 12 before settling in Zimbabwe. And and as a kid growing up, I mean, family members, we had malaria, also schistosomiasis, bilharzia, and received horrible treatments. And as a kid, I just remember having this horrible treatment, that made you feel terrible, but didn't really think of the consequences and the impact of it. And and I think it's only now, having lived over here, in the UK and in the US and going back there now, that you realize the extent of the problems. I mean, I was one of the lucky ones who actually had access to, to treatment. But you just realize, and also from doing the, work on the global health projects, it makes you realize the extent of the problem. The number of, pregnant women and children is enormous, especially, who have neglected tropical diseases. And I think, there is that. I know that people are aware of it, but I think we need to make them more aware of it. And I think, one of the good things about this group, and I know we'll come on to it later, is raising awareness, here and over there and everywhere about how we can actually, better treat, these people, because we can, and that's where modeling will come in. I know, but that's all I'm going to say on the matter now. I'm going to hand over to Ping.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Mark, for the question. In global health, I've been in the field for 5 years so far. Definitely a wonderful experience to kind of observe the differences between the so-called high-income country setting and the low and middle-income country setting in terms of healthcare. There are a lot more to consider, the comorbidity, the demographic in, for example, Africa, Southeast Asia, the sort of difference in the sort of a social environment, and all contribute to a much more complex kind of healthcare scenario. And when it comes to the special populations that we're talking about at today's webinar, the individuals under age 5 and pregnant and lactating women are truly neglected in that scenario. We always make the comparison that in high-income country, we already treat these populations as special populations to begin with, and now they are changed to specific populations in the US. But in global health, they are oftentimes the target populations for global health. So I think that's really a shift of kind of the perspective for me. And I totally agree with Karen that there are some collaborative effort that we're working together with all the panelists here to try to make a change and make the paradigm changing from the so-called conventional sort of drug development paradigm where all the evidence are collected through the conduct of a clinical trial or clinical studies to a scenario where the models can help.
Thank you, Ping. I just want to pick up on one little thing here about the developing world. Isn't it true that in the developing world that children and pregnant women are some of the largest segments of the population? It's like that they tend to be demographically younger, so that that's actually the bulk of the population is young people, right? Is that more so than in the Western world?
That's a great question. It's probably A little bit of both, but I would say just from the vulnerability standpoint, one example that's very eye-opening to me when I first joined the foundation was working with a pharma partner to develop a compound that would treat the diarrhea disease. And if you think about certain pathogens, right? So maybe all of us adults, we all carry that pathogen, but we don't develop the disease. But for immune compromise or the children after 6 months, right, when they stop the breastfeeding, they may be the most vulnerable population. So they are the true sort of a disease target population. So it doesn't have to be, the sort of overall African population, but, just for that age group, it's kind of like in this country, I mean, in the high income world, we keep talking about the rare diseases, then how translatable is conducting a study in adult population to sort of 6 months to 2 year old population. So that's really where I mean in global health, oftentimes the young children, pregnant women, they are the target population for the specific diseases.
Great, thank you, Ping. I'm going to open this question up to the whole panel for some little group discussion. This next question, which is, why is it so challenging to develop or adapt treatments for prenatal and pediatric populations? Why, I think I've learned that there's a lot of off-label use. Why is it so hard to develop medicines for these populations?
Saskia, I'm volunteering you for that one.
Thank you. Well, I think there's two things. One, if you want to develop a new drug and a company is now developing a drug for adults, then they have to go into PSP, a pediatric study plan, or a pediatric investigation plan. And they have to do studies to show that the drug is effective or efficacious. That's a horrible word for me. And safe in kids. It's quite a hard program, although you can extrapolate, for example, efficacy to kids. But safety is harder. Also, dosing is sometimes harder. And you need patients. You need physicians who can do the studies. And you really need to... There's a lot of uncertainty because kids are not small adults. So you can say, well, maybe this disease is the same in a kid. Well, it may be the same, but it may not be the same. And you have to really look into the disease and the pathophysiology to understand it. That's one. And second, the PK may be a little bit different, but safety issues may also be different. But an important part is that you can extrapolate. So that's something that you can do. That's for new drugs. So it's the whole trajectory of figuring out how to design this drug development plan. If you don't know anything about the drug in kids, that's one. That makes it difficult for all these different aspects. And the other thing is, if a drug is already on the market for adults and, for example, already off patent and we use it off label, then it's hard because then you need, first people need to be convinced that the drug still has to be studied. And then you need to design a program which also addresses all these issues I just said about efficacy, safety, but also get the finances, get someone interested to finance this whole trajectory, which is extremely expensive. And that's another aspect that's difficult. But again, then we have to start thinking smart. What data do we already have? And can we use these data to support the efficacy and safety for this off-label use? But I think it's because kids are not small adults, and you really have to understand how physiology is different. And then all the other aspects are also important. But
Is it difficult to recruit pediatrics for clinical trials? Is it more challenging than it would be for adult populations?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I think it all starts with finding the patients. So and having the infrastructure in place, which is less advanced than for the adult world, because until 15 years ago, at least in Europe, companies didn't have to do pediatric studies. So the whole infrastructure lags behind. And then once you find a site that can have the patients, then again, There will be less patients per site compared to adult studies because there's less patients. Luckily, there are less kids that are sick. And then it really depends on the study. And we've noticed that if you have a really good randomized controlled trial and you can explain to parents why it's important, parents will often say yes. And also when it's a trial that may not directly benefit their child, but it's a well-designed trial that is safe, then parents also will say yes very often if you reduce the burden and the risks. And that's my experience, and that's maybe something that people don't expect. But it's not, I don't think it's that more difficult than adults, but it's just all these other things around it that make it difficult to find them.
Great. Thank you, Saskia. I'm going to ask the next question, which is, this is again directed to everyone. And I'm hoping we'll hear from Susan on this one, which is, what is physiologically based pharmacokinetics, otherwise known as PBPK, and how can it help address these challenges in treating pediatric patients? And also, we haven't said much about pregnant women, but also pregnant women.
Sorry, did you say to me?
Well, if you want, yeah. If you would, we haven't really heard from you much yet, so I thought maybe you could opine.
I just thought in terms of explaining what PBPK modelling is, wouldn't that be better coming from somebody like Karen?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk to that, obviously, but I'll try not to talk to it for about half an hour. I was going to say, just put your hand up when I'm talking too much. Yeah, well, in fact, one of the key things I think that, Saskia mentioned was obviously children aren't small adults. And I think that's one of the big things about, PBPK modeling is that, for those of you who are less familiar with it, we've got, in vitro data for a drug in development that we can take. We can put it into a PBPK model. And then what we can do is apply physiological changes. So we can simulate the exposure of a drug in the body. And using essentially creating a virtual population. So we can also create a virtual pediatric population and also pregnant women as well. And the changes that are happening, as a consequence of pregnancy or developmental changes, occurring in children as they're getting older, we can actually model that, within the PBPK models and account for these changes and see what impact they're having on the exposure of a drug in the plasma or different tissues within the body. And that's really why PBPK modeling has become, so big, certainly over the last, decade or so. It's because we can actually consider the time variant changes, but also the physiological changes as a consequence of disease, consequence of age, and also, changes that occur during pregnancy. And the thing about it is the special populations, it's a really challenging area, but really exciting area for PBPK modeling. So now, Sue, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to put myself on mute.
So thank you for, yes, and I think that really that's the strength of it, is the mechanistic understanding it brings, and it allows you to understand the physiological changes that happen in these what we call special populations that we're talking about. So and so we know how we might expect the pharmacokinetics to change compared to what we know we have in adults if we have adult data, and really that will help inform clinical studies. So we've often asked for it in terms of the PIPs, what we call the PIPs, the pediatric investigation plans, that modeling to help design your clinical trials, and really it can really minimize the amount of data that we need in the pediatrics. So we only need some sparse samples rather than full PK profiles and things like that, and I think it really brings the strength there.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Thanks,
I'd like to add to this, because my PhD, after I became an MD and decided I wanted to be a pediatrician, my PhD was actually on understanding the developmental change in drug metabolism for one specific enzyme. And the whole goal was that we would develop an in vivo method to measure this activity. So then based on this drug metabolizing enzyme activity, we could then dose the drug. But this concept was just give one marker to one patient for one specific drug metabolizing enzyme. in PBPK modeling, everything is already included. So all this knowledge we have from all these individual drug metabolizing enzymes, from the size of the organs, from the blood flow, from the drug transporters, all this pediatric information is included in these software programs, and that you integrate everything together, and that helps you to predict or to simulate what dose you will need to have a certain exposure. And we're also now using this into clinical, using it to come up with doses for clinical care as well, not only to inform clinical studies. And I think that's something that well, 25 years ago, it was mainly done in not in clinical pharmacology, but it was done in toxicology, and that it has that all the research that we as pediatric clinical pharmacologists over the years have done in the lab or in patients, that it's all in one model. I think it's fantastic, and it really helps everyone a lot. Has really changed things.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, Saskia, I think, that's such a key important, point really about the integration of all of the data, because we've got lots of different processes going on. Obviously we've got the ontogenies related to all the different, enzymes, transporters, and yet in a PBPK model, we can have a look at the consequences of all of these changes happening on the exposure rather than just focusing on one individual aspect. And I think that's absolutely key. And I think, to take it further, we can actually simulate an individual, with, specific characteristics and have a look at that, have a look at the effect of pharmacogenetics and all of these different aspects, because typically clinical studies, as we know, have a small number of subjects, but what we can do is actually generate a virtual population with all of these different characteristics and have a look to see what, the impact on the exposure of the drug.
We've talked a lot about pediatrics so far. I was wondering if we could just take a couple minutes to talk about what are the needs and challenges, particularly in pregnant women, which is the other population that we're focusing on today. So does anybody want to say a little bit about what some of the challenges is of treating the moms basically while they're gestating?
So I can certainly start with that. So obviously, I mean, you've talked about the moms, there's the moms, but there's also, the fetal exposure as well. And,
Yeah.
And I think obviously, I mean, during pregnancy, several things that you've got to consider really is, how important is the drug, obviously, to the mother. And then you've got to weigh up the consequences of giving the drug to the mother and what impact and what exposure, are you going to have, and is that going to be toxic to, the fetus? And, so all of these things that you have to consider. And that is something that, that there's a lot of ongoing work in that area at the moment. But as I said, I think it's important to look at it in its entirety, because at the end of the day, you have the, baby growing within inside the mother, and then you've got the placental, transfer of the drug, and I think that really that's the beauty of the PBPK modeling, is that you can consider all of that, parent and also, the mother and also the baby and the transfer of the drug, and then make those, make decisions about the potential consequences. So Ping, I don't know whether you want to say any more about that, about ongoing programs, or
Oh yeah, sure. I think
or
just
your
to,
thoughts on that?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, so thanks, Karen. And I think this sort of goes back to an earlier question that Mark posted, which is, why it's hard to develop treatment, and this is really challenging our norm of conducting clinical studies to collect all the evidence for the sake of providing the dosing recommendation for these special populations. And this is even a worse situation in pregnant and lactating women than in pediatrics. And when we talk about the current question around what is PBPK and how it can help, I feel like for pregnant women, lactating women, when I was first impressed by what Saskia was doing in Dutch formulary, in terms of the percentage of compounds that are utilized off-label with literally, very few evidence or very kind of shaky evidence, and then later on learn from Sue, that when MHRA conducted research to look at how many drugs have been mentioned, have a labeling kind of implication, in UK, of however many compounds that have been used in pregnant women, only 5 have dosing recommendations that are sort of based on clinical evidence. But when you dig into that 5 compounds, the sort of evidence is really, really shaky. And I think the for pregnant women, it's a much bigger problem in terms of the challenge we're facing, the shortage of solutions. And the more I think about it, is transitioning from a regulator to a global health sort of program officer, I feel that this is probably the most convincing fact that off-label in all these special populations are common, and the problem has been coming over and over. Just couldn't come up with any other alternatives but PBPK modeling. As just all the elements that Saskia, Sue, and Karen addressed towards the question around what PBPK can do.
So I just wanted to say to Ping, so is shaky a scientific term then? Sorry, you were just talking about the evidence being shaky.
Well,
so I didn't know whether that was
I can speak to that with a little bit of authority, with the limited experience at FDA, by looking at sort of the level of evidence in a particular section. For example, for pregnant women, you could see a lot of the discussions around animal findings, right? Let's say section 8.1 of FDA label, or 4.2x in the MHRA label. But I guess from Saskia's standpoint, as a physician, you probably will be just amazed by how many information are put out there that are not strictly relevant to what you plan to do, versus when it comes to clinical finding. Unfortunately, for pregnant women, we often just have some registry data, right? So it's very kind of a passive, collected over decades to give us sort of a confidence that this drug is safe to be used in the second and third trimester. But with newer drugs, when there's no information, when there's sort of no exposure of the compound yet to pregnant and lactating women, it just, there's nothing. It's oftentimes the blanket statement is nothing has been done in this population. Do not use the drug, or use drug with caution. So I think this is really where the sort of a challenge everybody's facing, not just the colleagues within our community, but it's broader clinical community. But the PBPK modeling, I think, is really the way to go. I could be biased because I work in this field. But this question has been haunting me, for more than 10 years, I have to say.
Thank you, Ping. I'm actually, that's a great segue to my next question this is directed to you and Susan, because you both have worked at regulatory agencies, namely the FDA and MHRA. And I'm just curious as to what the current stance is on applying physiologically based PK to these populations, and also, has that thinking changed over the years, in recent years, relative to, say 10 years ago or something? So could you both maybe weigh in on that a little bit?
So shall I start? Yes. So, everyone's probably aware that there is a big drive from all the regulatory agencies really at the moment to use modelling in drug development. And you've probably heard of the MID, the modelling in drug development. Even there's a concept paper I saw on LinkedIn for an ICH group to look at harmonising that approach across the regulatory agencies. And PBPK is very much a part of that. And, and I think the importance that it brings in terms of that mechanistic understanding is understood, and we've talked about how, you can incorporate the changes in physiology in these special populations, the pediatrics and the pregnancy that we're talking about. So we do very much encourage the use of modelling and have done for quite some time in pediatrics. As Saskia mentioned, the new drugs coming along have to have a PIP, and part of that would include the modelling to support the clinical trial designs. So, and pregnancy as well, probably more recently, but saying that probably for the last few years, we've been trying to encourage the use of modelling in pregnancy as well, and hence the project that we have with the Gates Foundation. I probably have to give some caution as well, though. I mean, we do very much encourage the use of the models, but the issue is that we don't have a lot of data. When you've got a model, you like to sort of validate that model or qualify the model. And as we've heard, there just isn't a lot of data in pediatrics, and particularly in pregnancy, to help us to qualify those models. So if we have a model, and we do see models produced and then used for all sorts of applications, from special populations to drug interactions to biopharmaceuticals. And, really what we ask for is, some sort of clinical confirmatory data at the moment. It would be nice in the future to be able to use the models without asking for clinical data as well. But really, we need that. It's a bit of a circular argument. You need that data to be able to sort of qualify the models. There isn't a lot of data out there at the moment, and that's part of what we've been looking at. How good is the data that's out there that supports the models themselves? So yeah, I mean, this is maybe something we can have more of a discussion on, how exactly we can use these models and how we use them alongside the clinical data itself.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So you said that there's not, the models are not usually a substitute for data, but is it true that using the model can reduce the amount of data that you actually need?
Yes, and I think that's the stance we take at the moment. Is like, as I mentioned earlier, you can use your model and you can use it to predict what you think the exposure is going to be, and then use that in your clinical trial design to maybe just say, if we have certain time points, sparse sampling approach. Yes, I think that's the way I see the models being used at the moment, but I would hope in the future that might move on. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Ping, anything you'd like to add about the regulatory perspective at the FDA?
Yeah, sure. I think, again, the transitioning into a global health setting forced me to think this question deeper, and also give me time to reflect on the sort of success and challenges we had with the industrialization of PBPK in drug development and regulation. I think, Sue, like panel, the folks on the panel are all kind of like experiencing this together. When we look at back 15 years, right, the industrialization happened only when there are great needs from the broader community, right? The clinical reviewers are interested in not doing a lot more individual clinical pharmacology studies to understand every piece of drug-drug interaction liability, and that gives the PBPK the opportunity to shine. And the science was there, right? The science was there, lots of validation being done for the modeling, and also the availability of the software products, right? So that's very important to address. That really, kind of propelled the industrialization of PBPK, so that it can be routinely used, not just by experienced modelers, right? So, at least it can be understood by a lot broader sort of audience. And then it comes to the question of whether we can learn from the DDI experience. And I'd have to say, extending PBPK to special population is the natural next step. And we have seen very promisingly the increased use in pediatric sort of NDAs submissions by sponsors to apply PBPK to answer a variety of questions. So I think that this psychological first step is very hard to take. Even think back then, 15 years ago, Karen, I don't know if you remember the time when, we worked on the first several examples on having the DDI findings in the label or not in the label. So I think now it's kind of a routine, but we haven't got to that point for pediatrics, and this is almost zero for pregnant women and lactating women. So then the question is, how do we get there, right? And then it comes to the question, obviously, as Sue illustrated, is the science has to be solid enough, right? But then the question then is the model that bad? And I look at it even before 2017, many works have been published, right, by LSKE on pregnancy, this work published by AstraZeneca on pediatrics. So I think the virtual physiology has been independently tested over time within either the one of the major software products. Right now the virtual physiology models are really bitten to the point where they have seen enough compounds that we should feel confident to use them. And also keep in mind, even for DDI, we're not 100% confident with all the scenarios, right? So we're still learning, and there are there are situations like transporter prediction, phase 2 enzyme predictions, where we're improving all the time. So we cannot look at things statically, right? It's really evolving, and I believe the PBPK models are improving like on a if not like on an hourly basis. It's with so many researchers pouring their energy into this field, it's improved dramatically. It will be much better in the near future. So I'm pretty confident.
Okay, thank you, Ping. I'd like to move. Yeah, we got a couple more questions, and then we're going to get hear some questions from the audience, which, by the way, the questions are pouring in, so we want to give them a little bit of time. Before we do that, yep. I just have a couple more quick ones. Well, for one thing, Karen, we've heard about the landscape at FDA and MHRA. You engage with other regulatory agencies around the world. Is it a similar story? In general, does it seem to be a trend that like PMDA and some of the other regulatory agencies are showing more like acceptance and interest in these sorts of approaches?
Yes, I think, I'll try and keep this brief because I'm conscious of time, but I think generally, I mean, to go back to Sue's point, yes, I think all regulatory agencies, are quite supportive of PBPK modeling. I think, that's a given. I think, typically when I look at the European agencies versus the other, and Sue, don't kill me here, I can't believe you've given me this question with Sue sitting in front of me. I find that they tend to be more conservative than the FDA and the PMDA, certainly with respect to, drug interactions and PBPK modeling. But I think that's probably a consequence of the the European agencies have been pushing more for qualification, depending on the context of use. And I think in this particular case, because we're talking about special populations, high risk populations as well, I think I would say that all agencies, regulatory agencies, are really wanting more evidence, or at least wanting some evidence before they would support PBPK modeling. But I think the good thing is, in terms of the pediatrics, the PSP and PEP plans are great because at least you've got to think about that now and then put in a plan. But I think also from our perspective, that is why we're trying to pull all of the examples together from the literature and put these towards qualification papers out there, so that we've got all of the evidence together, so that then at least we can try and push this forward. And and as Ping said, I think with respect to pregnancy, there are a lot of examples, a lot of publications out there, people using PBPK modeling and verifying, the actual models for many different types of drugs. But again, I think it's about getting that momentum, and pulling all of the information together so that we can share with the regulatory agencies, to actually get them to moving towards acceptance. But we're getting there. 15 years ago, as you said, Ping, I mean, I felt we were never going to get there, but, absolutely. I mean, we've already seen a change. We just need to get pediatrics, I think, to the goalpost, and then carry on pushing with pregnancy. But that's the whole point of these discussions that we're having now.
Okay, one last question. We're going to make this a quick one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the horn, and I'm going to say, if you could do like one thing to sort of, if you could give one statement of advice to sort of help realize the potential of PBPK, yeah, what would be like one thing that we could do? And so it's just like, so that we can, so let's do it quick. Saskia, what's one thing that you think would be a major step forward that would help, you know?
Yes, so not only thinking of a pre-authorization phase, but also for off-label use, I think it's extremely important. And what would really help is if we would share the good examples, not only with the regulator, but also with our colleague physicians and patients and parents. And they, especially in pediatrics, they are kind of like already getting this model-informed dosing, but in pregnancy, it's a completely new field. And they are really interested, but we have to show them that it works. And I think if we can show them good examples, I think it will work. And they are really excited to start using it as well. And I think we should not forget the parents, the mothers and the fathers. They're really interested in this stuff, and they really want to be part of the decision making when it's about their child.
Thank you, Saskia. Susan, any thoughts on this?
So I would say, more clinical data, and I'm not condoning this, but obviously they are used a lot off-label, and if there are any way we can get more clinical data in terms of opportunistic samples as the drug is actually being used anyway, and use that data to, like I say, help validate the models and qualify the models, I think that would be really useful.
Perfect. Thank you, Susan. Peng, over to you.
Yeah, so very exciting topic always. I think research will not be a problem because there are so many more people jumping into the field and contributing to the refinement of the models. Then it comes down to education and the socialization beyond, again, our limited society. I don't know, the audience for this webinar, are they all clean farm crowd or beyond the clean farm, but our clinical and the pharmacy colleagues need to know what we're doing, as Saskia mentioned, and also the team that in her group are really doing a fantastic job in kind of like ground leveling the topic among different stakeholders, and in addition to that, I feel like the software developers also need to think about the innovation, not to just sit on the very good and nice things and then make the software even more user friendly. I think that's really gonna further change the game.
Great, thank you, Peng. Any thoughts from you, Karen, before we take audience questions?
Yeah, I would just say I think collaboration is really important, to get the data that that we need, in terms of clinical data and in vitro data to support the model. And just one last thought as well is that, I get a bee in my bonnet because a lot of people say that we need a lot of data to drive these models and that they're not there yet. They are there. We are there. For certain, questions, we are there. And I think it's time that we started using these models to answer a lot of what if questions. So, and I think, the more that we encourage people to use them, the more examples will come out and we will get to where we are with DDIs.
Great, thank you. All right, first audience question. Can the panel discuss their views on how pediatric and pregnant PBPK applications decrease the actual time it would take the medicines to reach these specific populations, and strategies in their view to accelerate studies in these populations?
Are we allowed to nominate somebody for that? Not me.
Sure.
It certainly will. That's my simple.
Yeah, I think maybe Karen spoke to some of this when she was talking about how the use of the models can actually reduce the amount of data that you need, and the more data, the longer the longer it's gonna take to gather it, right? So that's probably, yeah.
I think to make it very, very concrete, I think previously when we started the pediatric investigation plans, there were PK studies. You had to do a PK study in quite a significant number of children to actually really clarify the changes in pharmacokinetics. And then the PD study came, the efficacy study came, using that dose that came from all these PK studies. And there was already some overlap using some other methods, but now with PBPK modeling, it's much easier to target your dose and then even start with that dose from the PBPK model already in the efficacy trial, and then adjust the dose, maybe even adjust the dose. And I've seen this happening in studies, adjust the dose based on pharmacokinetic sampling, very limited sampling, just going back to the PBPK model, and then move on in this same efficacy trial. And you need way less kids, and you don't need non-therapeutic trials where you only do PK.
Great. Thank you, Saskia. That's a really great, thank you for making that more concrete, as you said. That's very helpful. So I'm going to paraphrase this next question a little bit. The question is, is anyone here familiar where the preclinical animal model has not been very predictive of the fetal safety? Whereas, and maybe are there instances where like a in silico approach such as PBPK might have been potentially more predictive than like an animal model, for instance? No?
Not that
Okay.
I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, it came from the audience. So let's see. So next question.
Well, maybe I could answer. Well, so there are examples, but really early on, of teratology issues that didn't rise, that only came to light after the preclinical studies. But that was only a one animal study that changed the whole paradigm of two animals for pregnancy studies. And there are approaches, but they have not been implemented or accepted by the regulator, where you can actually do in vitro studies first in human tissue or in cell-based tissue, and then move towards PBPK modeling and make a complete in vitro or ex vivo in vivo PBPK study without using animals. I don't have enough time to completely explain it, but people are working on this, but it needs acceptance from the regulator, and there's also people working on this.
Okay. All right. Next, thank you, Saskia. Next question. I think this is particularly interesting. This audience member is interested in hearing panelists' view on the opportunities for bedside PBPK applications beyond population level predictions.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
So we're in favor.
I think we're heading to that direction.
Yes.
As I mentioned, the innovation just within the software developers that could really drive such changes, and also the sort of unmet need, again, beyond the clinical pharmacology community. It is so huge, right? So, just like looking at how would we address 50% of compounds that are currently used off-label just in Dutch formulary, right? And then beyond that, only 5 compounds are used in off-label by physicians for pregnant women in the UK. So these are just like a single country findings, and I think they represent the scenarios for the whole world.
Yeah,
and
well,
definitely.
I have to present tomorrow because we have 25-year anniversary of our PICU, and the question to me was, talk about future of pharmacology, and that's my message. My message is, in a few years, hopefully, I can go to the unit, my colleagues are in the unit, and this patient who is on ECMO, who has renal failure, but also has a high CRP and inflammation, how am I going to dose my drugs? And that the computer will tell my colleagues, and I don't even have to be there, how to dose drugs. That's the future, I think, of pharmacology, and I think PBPK modeling could help with this, could be the bottom behind the scenes, the software behind the scenes doing this.
So
Not
sorry,
a few
Saskia,
years, a little bit longer.
I was going to say, that's my question to you. You think a few years? Yeah, I think
a little bit longer. There's too much other issues. I think the science is almost there, but I think the whole implementation in all the MDR, I think that gives a lot of other issues. But
Yeah. But I think at least with the PBPK, we're talking about precision dosing, aren't we? Individualize, whichever terminology we want to use. But I think at the end of the day, with the PBPK modeling, what we can do is have a look at the variability across a population specific to a disease. And also, importantly, we know that individuals are often taking 9, 10 medications and, the drug-drug interaction potential as well. So I think with PBPK, yes, we got the potential to look at all of that, but it is going to take some time, I think, to be able to get to that point. But we're heading there, and we are getting there. Yeah, I'd like it to be 2 years, but I don't think it is.
All right. Thank you. All right, I got an interesting one here for you. I guess one of the audience members would like to know if you're trying to model exposures in multiple fetuses, so multiple births, is that any more challenging than a single fetus, or are there, are there complexities there? I think we've stumped you guys. Yeah, I thought
Let's
that
deal
one
with
was
one at a time.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of twin it is as well,
Yeah.
and how how do you say, the arterial blood and the venous blood comes and goes to both fetuses. I think that's important to know.
Okay. All right.
And then you might be
Yeah.
able to model it, but hey, I'm not the modeler here.
Yeah, it seems like an unusual circumstance. Maybe it'd be interesting for someone to give it a try, in a paper or something. But so one last question from the audience here. And I think this is directed to Karen. Can you give a few major differences between PBK modeling for adult populations versus the pediatric in particular? What are some of the things that are different in those populations other than just body size that you might have to account for?
Well, because obviously one of the key areas that we're working on is the ontogenies related to transporters and also enzymes, and in fact that's one of the areas where PBPK modeling has been, I think, pushed in terms of because under twos, because obviously you get those developmental changes. But yes, that's one of the more obvious ones. I think also in terms of the pregnancy as well, we know that some of the enzymes, CYP2D6, increases quite a lot as well over the different, as the gestational age increases as well. But a lot of this information is published, so in answer to that question, I think there are about 151 publications on pediatric PBPK. So that's something that we can certainly share with you afterwards if you're interested. But yeah, there's quite a lot of information on that.
Thank you, Karen. All right, so I think that's all for our audience questions. I'm just going to close with, does anyone have any final thoughts or recommendations to our audience as far as like calls to action?
When you design a study, always consider using PBPK modeling.
Okay. Ping, anything from you?
Yeah, I think just use them. And, as Saskia mentioned, this actually answers one of the last question is first in human dose prediction for for the scenario where there's no pregnancy data, definitely use it, right? And even think about after you get the first in pregnancy PK data, how are you going to interpret the data, right? In healthy volunteer, one narrow kind of a gestational stage, 35 to 40 weeks, how are you going to translate that data to the broader pregnancy and even fetus exposure? So I think that's really where we have to ask ourselves whether the conventional kind of a drug, the conventional clinical studies and the clinical trial paradigm works for us.
Great, thank you, Ping.
It's not.
Yeah. Susan, any final thoughts from you today?
Just really, to publish data, share data, work together, and I know Satara Simpson have published a lot on the models. There's an IQ group that's looking at pediatric PBPK modeling, so that when we get a model in a regulatory submission, we can use data from publications to support that model. So I would encourage people to publish any data that they've got.
Great, thank you, Susan. Anything from you, Karen?
No, just again, collaboration to repeat what everyone else has said. The models are there, use them. They're not perfect, but but they can answer a lot of what if questions, and they're great to be used now for pediatrics and pregnancy. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all, panel members, and I want to thank our audience for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, being a part of this discussion, and I just want to say thanks once again.